morning, everyone. Thanks for your patience this morning. We've been experiencing some rather abrupt and severe technical issues. Most of us are here now. We have one on the phone and one more yet to join us. But for now, we'll get things started. My name is Dale Lunan. I'm the Americas editor of Natural Gas World, and welcome to the latest in our Canadian Gas Dialogues Pandemic Edition series of webinars. I'd like to acknowledge, first of all, that most of our participants today are webcasting from the traditional territories of the Treaty 7 First Nations, which include the three Blackfoot Confederacy Nations of Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani, as well as the Stoney Nakoda and the Tsuut'ina First Nations. Our discussion today will revolve around three key themes affecting First Nations specifically, but even as well as the broader Indigenous communities touched by energy resource development in Canada and specifically Western Canada. Our moderator today is Anne Harding, so I will turn her. She's with Community Relations Forum. Did I get that right?
Close. Forum Community Relations.
Close. Forum Community Relations. Sorry, I don't have my notes in front of me. So I'll let Anne kick things off, and she will introduce our panelists and direct the discussion, which I hope will be very timely and very forthcoming. Anne?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dale. And thank you, everybody, for hanging in there. Technology is great when it works and really frustrating when it doesn't. So thank you for joining us and having us with you. Echo 1 second. Okay. So we'll continue along, and I guess just for our panelists, and if we're not speaking, we'll get you guys to mute just so we can manage some of the that background noise. We're having mostly audio issues today. So Crystal, I'm just going to mute you here. There we go. So I'm very honored to be a moderator for this distinguished panel. These are leaders, thought leaders, organizational leaders, community leaders in Canada, in the Indigenous communities. And I am just thrilled to hear what they have to say. So joining us today are Chief Councilor Crystal Smith from the Haisla Nation, Stephen Buffalo, CEO of the Indian Resource Council, and Alicia Dubois, CEO of the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation and also co-chair of the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business. Thank you so much. So I'm going to throw it over to you guys to introduce yourselves and your organizations, but through the lens of economic reconciliation. So we hear a lot about reconciliation as a term, and that this is something that's important in our country. Within the space of energy development, we see a lot more talk about economic opportunities for reconciliation and bringing that together. And so this might be a new term for some of our attendees. And I thought maybe if you can tell us just a bit about the communities or organizations that you're connected to, as well as sharing your definition of economic reconciliation. How would you describe that term, and maybe like one or two things that your organizations are doing to support those efforts? So if I can get you to introduce yourselves, but with a bit of that lens, that would be great. So Alicia, we'll start with you.
Sure, thank you. Thanks for having me. So my name is Alicia Dubois. I'm the CEO of the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation, and as Anne said, I'm also the co-chair of the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business. Ultimately, both of these organizations act as a bridge between Indigenous groups, including communities and Indigenous businesses, to industry, with the aim of supporting partnerships between Indigenous groups and industry. And ultimately, through the lens of economic reconciliation, my view really is that the aim for us in achieving that is to foster active Indigenous economic engagement and economic equality. So really what we're looking for here are mechanisms or ways by which Indigenous peoples can engage in the economy in ways they have not had the benefit of traditionally. It's recognized that traditional economic practices are such that Indigenous people have been marginalized from the economy and also financial infrastructure. So building those bridges that facilitate partnerships and also access to capital so that there's the ability for Indigenous groups to invest and not just be recipients of revenue dollars, et cetera, but actually actively invest and participate in resource development, et cetera, is really key to economic reconciliation.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Crystal, I'll get you to introduce yourself and pop on your camera if you're able to there. We saw you for a minute.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
All right, perfect. I don't know what is going on with my computer today, so I completely apologize. I was the one creating the echoes in the background there while I was trying to get my computer working. So good morning, everybody. My name is Crystal Smith. I'm the elected Chief Councilor of the Haisla Nation. I am also the chair of the First Nations LNG Alliance. I'm also a co-chair of the Northern First Nations Alliance, which is a newly formed organization here in Northern British Columbia. And I also sit on a panel of leadership of 4 communities here in Northern British Columbia for the First Nations Climate Initiative. So I'm definitely a part of a lot of organizations that aim to accomplish what the previous panelist had described what economic reconciliation in her view was. So in terms of that, in Haisla territory, economic reconciliation is a meaningful partnerships that are established between proponents in our area, whether it be through major developments such as LNG Canada and the Coastal GasLink projects, but established partnerships that for proponents that have been in our territory for many years, and establishing the relationships to improve the quality of life for our members through those partnerships and agreements. It is definitely a process that is important to have the First Nations values and our culture be recognized, be respected in terms of the development of the economy within our territories. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Crystal. That's great. And Stephen, over to you.
Yes, thank you today for having me on this panel with such an illustrious group of panelists that we do have. Yeah, you know, we, through the Indian Resource Council, we've been around since the early 80s and primarily in oil and gas. And, you know, the thing about the history of oil and gas is that we learned a lot of tough, hard lessons in development, protecting the environment, and, you know, maintaining our communities. So through this resource, you know, a lot of our communities were able to take advantage and actually set some foundations with subsidizing the lack of federal funding that each community gets, and utilize the resource to help build schools, provide education, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And you know, as we move forward, you know, our role has kind of changed. You know, we've been advocating for First Nations oil and gas for since our existence, and the environment's changing, and I don't know if it's a compliment with the COVID crisis or whatever, but we're finding out things that you know, our position as First Nations and our governance is getting a lot stronger, and our position standing up for our own rights is definitely amped up. The reconciliation we talk about has been a word that's been utilized since the Liberal government has taken over our country, but that word needs to change to reconciliation. We need to see some more movement in our communities and our capacities to allow us to actually start maintaining and fending for ourselves. You know, I'm very honored to sit as the vice chairman of the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation. I get to work with Alicia, and quite honestly, I'm learning a ton from her. I'm learning a ton from our board, and it's that relationship with the government of Alberta that has allowed this to happen. And I hope it has a positive ripple effect that we see this across the country, this type of format. But you know, the economic reconciliation is happening now. It's just that our communities and our members and whoever else, we have to be prepared and welcome it with open arms, even though it might be different territory for a lot of communities. You know, it's just having our governance structure in place and the optimism of taking advantage of something that's probably in your traditional territory that's happening, and see if we can be a part of it in the financial benefits, and as well as the possible the work that may come from it for community members is something that we just have to explore. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. And Clifford, welcome. Glad that we were able to sort out the connection and have you join us. So we're just starting with introductions of yourself and giving a bit of a lens of economic reconciliation. So if that's a term that's out there, what does that mean to you? How would you sort of define that? And if you can tell us a bit about yourself as well.
Well, I am a colleague with Chief of the Northern Nations group, and I'm also with the working quite a bit with the province on the BC Treaty Commission, as well as working with the Northern Nations Coalition. So the Northern Nations Coalition is a new group, but it stretches all out to the across Canada. And we're still developing that process. It's an economic arm for Indigenous people, and finding not only organizations or business opportunities for Indigenous communities, but also facilitating resources to go along with that. So that's all in its developmental stages. With Chief Crystal, we've been working with the First Nations Alliance in BC here, and you know, supporting that because it means a lot to our Indigenous communities as far as gas sector is concerned. We recognize that there are some limitations with regards to environmental issues, but they're much better than what currently is happening in the world, and so that we strongly anyway, I'm also a military leader with Gitxaala in northern British Columbia. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. That's great. And so I'll sort of pick up on some themes that I heard and shift into the next conversation that we want to have. But we talk about, so I heard meaningful partnerships, and that's what we're looking for is, or economic engagement, just not being on the receiving end, but sort of this two-way of what is that meaningful participation, action, as Stephen said, not just talking, but taking specific action. And so I'm wondering, and we'll just sort of throw it open for anybody who wants to respond, if you can give us an example of how an Indigenous community or group has taken action and participated in a meaningful way, or had that meaningful partnership with energy development, if there are just some examples that we can pull out for folks. Go ahead, Alicia.
I'm happy to talk about very strong procurement-based partnerships because that really does clearly require action on both sides of the equation. So it means you need an industry partner that has procurement policies and procedures established that acknowledge the need for Indigenous supply chain members to be very active in their procurement. And of course, on the other side, you need the right partners, i.e. Indigenous partners, to respond to those policies and be prepared to engage in a meaningful way as part of the supply chain. And we've seen incredible examples of this in the Alberta oil sands. And the echo effect of that means much higher standard of living for Indigenous groups that are participating as part of the supply chain, and like incredibly low unemployment rates, annual salaries that surpass the national average by approximately $20,000 per year. I mean, it's very impactful, because all of this echo effect of that partnership means there's an opportunity for social wellness within the communities, political strength for the leaders that are guiding those communities, and then these positive interactions and partnerships actually beget even more positive partnerships. And I'll give an example, because I think numbers are important to sort of set that context for us. If we look at the federal government, it's the largest procurer of supplies and services and goods in the country. So I think their annual procurement envelope is just over $220 billion. And if you look at and they do have a program that is, supposed to facilitate Aboriginal procurement practices. And if you look at what they actually do, according to recent statistics, is I think it was the 2018 year, we see in the last 3 years, the average dollar amount that actually goes to Indigenous supply chain members is between 60 million and 100 million. So that equates to about 0.3% of their total procurement envelope. And this being highlighted to them is actually what led to them setting new targets for themselves. We refer to it as the 5 and 5. So they're going to aim to enhance Indigenous procurement within their envelope to 5% of their total envelope in the next 5 years. So that's a huge growth. And then in contrast, if we look at the activity we've seen in the oil sands, it's quite impressive. So from what I understand, in 2017, Imperial Oil's procurement with Indigenous groups was around 220 million in that year. For Syncrude, it was around, I think, about 350 million. And in 2019, Suncor's procurement with Indigenous suppliers was over 800 million. This is significant, and that's what's driving prosperity for that region, and that's what's creating and setting the stage for even more meaningful partnerships in that region.
Thanks a lot, Alicia. Part of my earlier time was with Suncor, setting some of those early procurement policies and recognizing that you absolutely need that intention on behalf of the organization to drive that, because that's the opportunity in the supply chain, right? Is how it follows. I'm curious, are there examples sort of that others want to share from the community perspective, maybe some specific examples of those meaningful partnerships or economic action?
Well, I would say that, when you're participating as an owner, now at least you have a say. You're at the table, and it's way past tokenism. Obviously, with the developments that are happening, everyone's scared of a bitumen pipeline. The social media and everything that's out there about bitumen and how it moves through a pipeline is so overamped that they don't take time to see both sides of the story on pipeline development and the monitoring that goes on with our regulations here in Canada. It's world class. What we do in Canada is world class to protect the environment, but everyone's still scared of it. And when you're part owner of, say, for an example, of a pipeline, not only the financial benefits you see, but you're in charge of it now. You can have your people monitor that type of infrastructure to ensure the safety of your environment, of your traditional lands, and obviously it's part of your culture. That's what we're not really pursuing, and I think that's something that we all have to chase to really investigate. Just because someone says it on Facebook and on Twitter, it doesn't mean it's true. and when some of these actors, these Hollywood actors and these activists that come forward, you you have to take it with either sugar or salt, depending on what you want to ensure that you understand the full dynamic of what they're really arguing about, you know. And it's to the point where you do your own research and you find out truly what it means. You know, there's a lot of great intentions. Green energy is great intentions. You know, we talk about solar paneling, we talk about creating power or energy in different forms, and really that's what it is. And as we as Indigenous people connected to the earth, connected to nature, we have to investigate those opportunities to ensure that we're not one, we're not hoodwinked. Two, that our position is in a strong, in a place where you have a strong say to really, one, say can't do it that way because of this, or we have to pursue this alternative to for the greater good. You know, that's kind of how I see it. Thanks.
So, and if I may, there's a lot at the local levels that could actually happen. And I think Chief Smith's community is a great example in terms of what's happening within the oil and gas industry, where there's a lot of developments that have been happening from the partnership level on making sure that there's not only ownership by First Nations, but also allowing for other partnerships. Chief Smith, through the Haisla group, have actually extended the invitation to all Indigenous people and you know, people who are employed there, Métis, Inuit, First Nations, you know, those living within their communities, away from their communities. But further to that, you know, all those social issues like housing, for example, are being addressed. You know, the community concerns with regards to substance abuse, violence against women and children, you know, the child care issues, all of those immediate issues are highlighted by any kind of economic ventures that are being offered. But I think the important part, if we use Haisla's example with regards to what happened there, is that people came forward, industry came forward with funds. So it wasn't just a partnership on paper. It was, you know, a partnership by the Haisla people along with other First Nations and the industry. So there, as Stephen has mentioned, you know, it's that ownership piece. When you take ownership on it, we have a whole bunch of responsibilities that come along with that. And now we're responsible for highlighting those responsibilities and what are we going to do about it. Within the Haisla example, we're finding a lot of entrepreneurs who are coming forward, you know, through that issue of procurement, people who are developing new jobs and creating more employment for our people. The whole issue with regards to transportation, we're finding Indigenous transportation that has come up, and Indigenous ownership within stores and different opportunities that are there. The whole environmental issue that Stephen also mentioned, you know, that's heightened as well. Everybody's looking at how can we protect our lands that have been given to us by our Creator. And so, you know, these are things that at the grassroots level make a huge difference. But now the opportunity with regards to not only on the oil and gas, we're looking at how do we deal with forestry, mining, aquaculture, you know, agriculture, and a whole bunch of different streams of opportunities that are arising. And so, you know, those opportunities are there, and we want to make sure that all Indigenous people are being able to participate in that. And I can't say enough good words about the Haisla Nation in terms of opening that up and sharing a really good model in terms of sharing with other Indigenous communities and non-Indigenous partners. Thank you.
Thanks, Clifford. Well, Chief Smith, now we need to hear more. from you about those great models, or about some of those specific on the ground examples, if you can share some. And I think you're on mute, so we'll get you to come off if you're able to there. Perfect.
Okay, can you hear me now? There, sorry, I started. So would you be able to rephrase the question again so that I can have a little bit more, I was so concentrated on everybody's answer.
For sure. I think what we're looking for is sort of building on the idea that economic reconciliation is about meaningful partnerships and sort of two-way engagement. What we're looking for are some specific examples for what that might look like in community or on the ground, in terms of examples in your community of meaningful partnerships.
Okay, so I think one important piece that we're definitely is a huge highlight in terms of my personal respect is the partnerships that we've been able to establish with our neighboring First Nations, as Cliff has alluded to. Prior to contact, each of our communities had our economic activity in between our communities in terms of our traditional trades and as such. And throughout the years, we've somewhat lost that and had a disconnect. It essentially, a lot of the Indian Act policies kind of pit us against one another over the years, and territorial boundaries definitely put a wedge between some of our communities in a political manner. And through opportunities such as LNG Canada and Coastal GasLink, we felt that it was absolutely important that we essentially share the wealth that's being provided in our communities. And from that, we've been able to establish partnerships with communities such as Cliff's when it comes to employment opportunities, contracting opportunities, and as well as the biggest piece that I focus on is the employment and training for long-term careers based on the LNG Canada project. Another piece that definitely makes me emotional and very proud is our ability to, through many established partnerships, is our focus and our ability to invest in revitalizing our culture and our language. A true strength of our First Nations identities is exactly that. And most First Nations, unfortunately, have lost that due to past trauma in our history in this country. And we're fortunate to witness the work of having a dedicated culture and language department. That's their sole mandate, is to develop curriculum that allows us to have fluent Haisla speakers in about 10 to 20 years. Those are all established through partnerships that we've never been able to do before. We're able to run programs that meet the needs of our people today. We're able to essentially break the boxes of policy that have been imposed on us from INAC for centuries, and not work for INAC, or I don't know what they're called, sorry. But we're able to work for our people. We're able to develop meaningful programs that meet the needs of our people and not outsiders telling us what we need to do. So it's definitely been inspiring, but that does not go without saying that all of this doesn't come without challenges. I'm proud of our nation that is willing to partner with any entity that provides an improved quality of life for our people. And I truly believe that reestablishing the partnerships with our neighboring nations is one of the most valuable ones. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Much appreciated. And I should have mentioned earlier for our attendees, if you do have questions, we'll try to leave a bit of time at the end, but feel free to type them in the chat, and if we can sort of weave them in, I'll work on that as well. So if you want questions or follow-ups, feel free to type those in. Where I'd like to take the conversation next is picking up on some of those challenges, or I guess pieces that seem to make things a little bit harder or more complex. And I'm going to sort of reference that complexity of working in Indigenous and non-Indigenous partnerships and in consultation. And so Chief Smith, you mentioned Coastal GasLink and the great opportunities that those partnerships have brought your community. I think many Canadians, that I know, were surprised earlier this year to learn that there can be multiple governance systems within Indigenous communities, and so there was a lot of media coverage around the Wet'suwet'en community and Coastal GasLink, and so I'm wondering, and maybe Clifford or Chief Smith, if you might be able to offer, just for those who are still trying to understand sort of that nuance and complexity, what different governance structures might exist in communities, and speaking from your own experience, recognizing that it's different across Canada, but also maybe what different roles are served by different leaders, and also what they have in common. We can just speak a bit to that.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I have the unique position to be a hereditary leader, along with having served a number of years in our elected chief and council. Two totally different governing systems, but the opportunity of working together is great in this area, where the chief and council, unfortunately, through the Indian Act, was imposed upon Indigenous communities, and the hereditary system pretty much pushed to the back. As a result of that, you're finding a resurgence from hereditary systems, which some communities use as family groups or clan groups, or there are different systems across the country that use the hereditary process, and are finding through the new reconciliation a new form, or it's not a new form of governance, it's a reawakening of the governance system that used to be there. Now, having said that, the challenges that are there in terms of marrying the two together and finding a way to have both systems play a critical role. I think Gitxaala has done an exemplary job in terms of bringing that together. So on a regular basis, both chief and council, the elected chief and council, and our hereditary table come together, recognizing the matriarch within that hereditary system, which has been backburnered even further. So a lot of our traditional people believe in the the role of the matriarch, for example, which is huge in our Indigenous communities. But a lot of that has been put out, through the missing and murdered women's piece. I think was long in coming. That should have been done quite a while ago. But we have a long way to go in terms of rebuilding our governing systems. A lot of that has been lost by some communities, and how do we bring that back? What Crystal was talking about, skills training and education. We have to develop that capacity within our communities. The Wet'suwet'en are a very good example of pushing the envelope in terms of where the hereditary process is. Gitxaala is doing exactly the same thing. They have their own agreements with the governments in terms of how to move things forward. And so the more that the hereditary system starts reawakening and developing a process, unfortunately, I think the federal government sees the hereditary system as a social governing system, and really there's nothing wrong with that. When you look at the leadership of the hereditary system, where children are brought up to be leaders, not only leaders within the political stream, but also leaders within language, leaders for culture, leaders for food sustenance, leaders for the environment, and so on and so forth. And perpetuating that by having the next in line. There's always somebody next in line that's up and coming through that system, where they're brought into the big house, or they're brought into the feast house, or the potlatching system, and you see that graduation and capacity building that's layers deep within the hereditary system. But the same, with regards to elected chief and council. There is a process before elected chief and council that has been well established by ISK now, formerly INAC, and that those two have to be brought together. There is a way, because we're talking about our brothers and our sisters who have been elected, and those who have been born into a hereditary process. And in the hereditary process, if a house has lost its leadership process, there is a way of bringing that house back in, and the whole community working to make sure that that house ends up with a leader, or that clan ends up with a leadership process. And so we've experienced that as well in Gitxaala. And so there have been people who have been brought up in that system and taught what that process is all about. So a lot of that is through the feasting system, and all of those ceremonies and laws are brought in. So reconciliation today has opened the door to that. It also has opened the door provincially, federally, to Indigenous laws, to the acknowledgement of Indigenous laws and the allowing of Indigenous laws to prevail. So all of those are currently being negotiated through the new UNDRIP, and we want to make sure that we play a role in that, and that's where our responsibility comes into play. It's one thing to have UNDRIP and all that, but it's up to each and every one of us to continue to push that envelope in terms of what does that actually mean. And business is one of those huge portfolios in there. It's one component of the overall structure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Clifford. That's really helpful. I think just such an important and explanation for people who are reading headlines and seeing sort of flashes of news and trying to make sense of it. And thank you for offering that. Stephen, were you looking to get in there?
Yeah. Just to follow up with Mr. White and what he's talking about, even our community, we've adopted our own traditional electoral law, to help our people. And to be honest, my father was the chief, and the current chief now, they still, not in a formal way, but they go and meet with our community elders on certain issues that are troubling the community, and they get direction from the teachings that they had been taught. And even further to that, they through ceremony ask, if we believe in a higher power, which we do, ask those questions for guidance on certain things. But it's amplified, unfortunately, in Wet'suwet'en, just because of a national infrastructure project. And there's always questions about it. And we have to respect the natural law that the people of Wet'suwet'en have, and it's, we can't decide it for them. But at the end of the day, you have two governing bodies that are kind of, I think they're at a little bit of a conflict on deciding on the coastal gas link, and it's, I hope there's some closure to it soon, because as what has happened, and you look at the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People, some of these environmentalists have been taught to use the word free, prior, and informed consent. And they say, you do not have my free, prior, and informed consent to do this. And the intention of that declaration was to protect human rights and to acknowledge human rights of our people. It was to be used as a shield. But now we're finding through this through the environmentalist action and movement, the lawyers have taught these environmentalists to use that declaration statement, free, prior, and informed consent, as a spear. So the direction of the leaderships that are elected by the communities that want to participate, that want to see the financial benefit, that want to see the working interests on this pipeline, they want to provide that economic development opportunity to community, is now being kind of held up. And I hope there's some closure into that someday, because that's going to set a precedent going forward for the country. You know, we talk about different forms of governance in our communities, and it's really being prepared to deal with the current business and how fast it moves. Mainstream society moves pretty quick, as Alicia will tell you, that we have to be able to adapt and move as quick as the business moves, and to make the decisions as soon as we possibly can, so we don't miss out, so we don't lose out or get taken advantage of. And you know, it's difficult, but we're getting close. We're getting there. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. And Chief Smith, I'll go to you next. I see you're off mute. And just a note for participants, we did get started a bit late, so I think we'll probably go a little bit past the hour. But this is being recorded, so if folks need to leave, they'll get the recording, as long as our panelists don't have to end right away. If you do, send me a message. And so Chief Smith, will go over to you.
Thank you. I'd just like to start out by saying that anything that I do say, I mean no disrespect to either side when we're discussing our cultural leaders, our hereditary chiefs. However, there are successful examples of how our governance systems essentially can come together. I think what is, I won't repeat what the other two panelists have said. However, I think one of the main components of that discussion that happened and it's been going on longer than January, but I think what is being lost in this conversation are the people. Regardless of hereditary or your titles, I feel very strongly that both governance systems have a obligation to our people, and I believe that throughout all of this, that our people should be put in the forefront. Our people should be giving either leadership the mandate as to where they want to see themselves in 10 to 20 years. I believe that there's reconciliation is required in between our own communities, and that cultural identity, as I stated in my previous response, a lot of that cultural identity and each community in this country is at different levels when it comes to that attachment and that different stage within that revitalization in their communities. Some held onto it very tightly and others haven't. And through that process, a lot of the cultural passings have been somewhat changed in that handing down of the hereditary names. And when that happens, a lot of conflict arises between community members on the belief of who holds what name. And to be successful in our communities, I believe that those issues need to be resolved within our communities, and then a mandate from our people as to how they want to see their leadership formed. And I feel that when you get to a consensus and have your community support 100% who they decide who leads them, you don't have that disconnect. And as I stated, Gitxaala has a very amazing system that works for their community, and it is definitely something for communities that aren't as advanced in that cultural aspect to view and to take into consideration when they do get there. But I think the ultimate topic is our people. You know, for far too long we've had no solutions for suicides, no solutions for poverty, no solutions for domestic abuse, no solutions for substance abuse, and all the while our people are living their trauma of their past history, whether it's residential school, whether it's the 60s scoop, or whether it's the murdered and missing Indigenous women. You know, all of those factors, and even the Indian Act still suppresses our people. And we need to find solutions for those issues today so that we continue to heal and move our people forward to meet that gap of the quality of life in comparison to all other Canadians. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Alicia?
The speakers on this panel are so knowledgeable, so inspiring, and really effective at setting the context. And I think the takeaway for partnerships is that this is not about westernizing people. This is about supporting prosperity in a way that allows Indigenous peoples and communities to honor and live out their traditional values and practices and ways of life while still contributing to the economy. These two things need not be at odds with each other. And that's the important balance, I think, that we need to find as we proceed in supporting partnerships in the economy, is always recognizing that there are very different lived experiences that need to be honored and respected as part of the process.
Very well said. Thank you so much.
Yes, that was an amazing summary, Alicia.
So if I may, Anne, you know, from a business perspective, you know, a lot of the business pieces that are taken, and I know that Stephen and Alicia have done a lot of this, along with Chief Smith, you know, around the holistic perspective of working with Indigenous people, recognizing that the Indigenous people come from a holistic perspective and not just looking at one particular item. So when they're looking at a pipeline going through, how does that affect the environment? How does that affect the animals and the air and you know, the ground itself? You know, and so, you know, from a spiritual perspective, I know that a lot of Indigenous communities are, you know, the prayers and offers that go forward, not only in the negotiations, but also in the development of all of these activities, because we do have a critical responsibility from an Indigenous perspective as the caretakers of Mother Earth. And we want to make sure that we start bringing all those into balance. We also recognize the positive developments that can come out of a true partnership. You know, all of the work that we've seen that's been going on within the north of British Columbia, and that couldn't have been done without them having an industry partner. And so we greatly appreciate all of that. And I agree with Alicia, you know, that there's some very knowledgeable Indigenous people throughout this country, and we need to tap into that knowledge and expertise. And we've been left out of it too long. And it's just the turn of the century that Indigenous people have been invited into this process. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve, we'll go to you, and then I'll ask like a final sort of wrap-up question. Go for it.
Just to add, you know, you're now seeing, you know, it's something that I've always recognized through mainstream business, is that they're always looking for a policy or a manual to deal with First Nations and you know, some sort of guide or reference guide to create those partnerships. But you're definitely seeing this trend, and it's the ESG, the environmental, social, governance, corporate governance structure. And I think part of this can be embedded into that, you know, because it's important that, you know, if we are going to be partners or if we're going to work on something together, that, you know, we understand each other. And that's really divulging back into a lot of the history. And when people go back into history, you know, they're ashamed that this was put on our people. And you know, they want to hide from that stuff. But at the end of the day, the learning from it is that you know, we can definitely work together moving forward once you understand where we came from, or some of the trials and tribulations that First Nations people have endured in this country. But the opportunities are there, and they're slowly coming to the forefront. You know, I want to acknowledge and recognize the Hydro One in Ontario. I think all the First Nations in Ontario, and I honestly can't remember how many there are, but I think 3 of the First Nations are ones that didn't participate in that investment. And it's tremendous. It's a big success story that you don't hear, because one, it's good news. You know, if it was bad news, you'd hear about it all the time. But yeah, you know, that's just, you know, another example of how First Nations and governance and government and industry can work together for the betterment of our people. That's all.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to combine sort of a couple of questions and ones that we've seen come through in the chat. And what we're going to do now is ask for your advice. So we're going to go around and have some closing comments asking for advice. And so one of the questions around advice is, what advice do you have for proponents if there is tension within an Indigenous community? Sort of what might make things better or what might make things worse? So what sort of advice do you have for a company looking to work with a community in a respectful and meaningful way when there are tensions? And then I also want you to tack on there your advice for the individuals who are listening to this call. So my personal view of reconciliation is it's concentric circles and kind of starts with an individual connection. And so I'd love for you to offer like one tangible thing that people on this call might be able to do and action that they might take. So double-barreled question if anybody wants to take a first cut.
I will.
Yep.
You know, I think, you know, when stuff like that comes forward, you got to think about the relationship, and you got to be transparent. You know, having a hidden agenda, you know, for industry, to take advantage of a community is you're not going to be successful in today's day. But you know, having that transparency will really open the eyes and give that opportunity truly to the nation. And again, the relationship, you know, I joke about it all the time. You know, we see consultants, lawyers, and different individuals come in our community to try to help us. You know, and some are good at it, and some of them leave legacy. I call those individuals the him okays or the she okays, because when they walk in the community and the elders are asking who that person is, the chief will say, him okay, him okay. So, you know, these people leave legacy. They leave, they help with infrastructure of the community. They help with playgrounds. They help with rec centers. They help with certain programs that the government won't fund. And these are the people we want to work with, because they understand and they have that relationship with the community.
Thanks, Stephen. Alicia?
I'm going to leave esteemed speakers to speak at the end. I was hoping to jump ahead of Stephen so that he could be after me. My one piece of advice is be accountable for your own learning. Be accountable for understanding that Canadians were not afforded a true history lesson. But there are many sources that people can go to get a true history lesson. And that's very important. And not to expect for your potential partners to be 100%, to play that role 100%. You have to be accountable. You have to understand that, you know, you're an active part of this equation, and that means doing some research and contemplating some self-awareness, contemplating what that means. And also to be patient, because relationships take time and effort and patience. And there's a lot of learning and lived experience to learn about far before you're going to be an effective partner. So those are my 2 takeaways.
Love it. Thank you. Chief Smith?
on following up on the two responses, I think along with being and having that accountability is the follow through. You know, establishing relationships and then having discussions. There's a lot of fear when it comes to any type of development within our territories regarding failed promises. When I first became an elected leader, I'd listen to stories of other proponents that had been through our territory and essentially had been gone, and what was said to our leadership at the time of what would come to fruition once those entities were running or when they were done, and our people that had been around in those years still remember that. So when we come from a place of not having trust, that's where I can see that lack of an effort on the First Nation side coming from. But I think the most important thing is in establishing the relationship with the First Nation is the respect of the rightful landowners. There are certain things within our territory that we hold very close to our culture, and knowing what is important to the First Nation and respecting that and working within those goals and objectives, it goes a long way. When we were establishing the relationship, our relationship with LNG Canada when they first came to Kitimat was not one that was great, and that took a lot of time and effort on part of our elected leaders, our people, and our staff. And they didn't only leave it to the conversations of elected leaders. They pulled in our community to get their insight as to what their recollection of our culture and what certain areas in our territory meant for our people. So I think that the respect of the knowledge holders of our traditional territories is hugely important. I just received an email as I'm on this call, and a possible proponent that I had a meeting with about 2 weeks ago just emailed me and said hello in our language. It's minor, but we definitely take notice to people that recognize the importance of who we are as Haisla people. So thank you.
If I can, you know, I do honor the group that's here with regards to their expertise. You know, Stephen, Alicia, and Chief Smith. The business environment has to recognize that all the leaders throughout Canada, Indigenous leaders, are taking a huge chance, a huge risk in terms of reigniting trust. When we look at the history of Indigenous people, the residential schools, the 60s scoop of children, the high incarceration of Indigenous people, the children who are you know, still within the Ministry of Childcare, all of the high poverty of a lot of Indigenous communities. The whole erosion of trust has been lost by Indigenous people. And so when business people come in and offer them something, and the broken promises that have come along with treaties as well, you know, those things have an impact. And the leadership that has been provided here by Chief Smith, Steve, and Alicia, you know, it is tremendous. People don't realize that these people are basically opening the door to business coming into the community with a great deal of fear on the side of the First Nations communities, wondering what are you asking for, and you know, how is that going to affect each and every one of us? So trust is a major issue. tensions are a good thing. And I would say that anyone who's coming into a community and see the tension. I've been involved where people have come into the rooms with war garments and masks and everything else, not because of COVID, but the army fatigue, that kind of thing, But once you start showing them and be very visual about it, have flip charts, have presentations, have handouts for people, that they can understand what those opportunities are and how it's going to affect them. The handouts are so critical in terms of being able to work with our people. So while I was a child, they basically said to me, look, God has given you 2 eyes to see from, 2 ears to listen from, and the same with your nostril, but he's only given you 1 mouth. So use those in direct proportion to what it's been provided to you. And so the listening, the active listening when we come into Indigenous communities as to what their concerns are, and make sure that we actually start addressing those. Those will come under what's masked as tension. And so it's really important for us to be actively involved in the listening of where the communities are coming from. When Gitxaala signed on to the Canada LNG, it wasn't just the community that came forward, the elders came forward, the kids came forward from the school, and the hereditary leaders, along with chief and council, signed off on the document together, in front of the whole community. And there was a ceremony that actually went on because they basically recognized that there was something important that went on here. So that's the kind of thing I think that if we go into Indigenous communities, we have to have that air of wanting to understand, seek to understand rather than to be understood, by myself, and just to get that information from our community in terms of where we're going. As far as reconciliation is concerned, we have to reconcile that. I'm involved with the city of Vancouver and the provincial government. They say, I don't understand why you guys need to be reconciled. Well, hang on here. Look, let's take a room. Now let's invite different ethnic groups into this room. So let's say we have 10 people in this room, and now the Indigenous owner of the room is put in a corner because he's now got to share this room. And so reconciliation is, now that you've taken part of my room, how are we going to reconcile that? How are we going to acknowledge that? First of all, we have to acknowledge that, and then we can get into reconciliation. But develop policies like equity, for example, in that scenario, you can't. Because how can it be equitable if there isn't reconciliation first? In terms of how are you going to be able to address the issue that this person has been displaced by at least 1/10 of their area. In this case, throughout the country, it's less than or around 7.5% of the territory that Indigenous people used to govern. And in treaties, it's down to that, where it's about 7.5% that has been provided to Indigenous people. But there's a lot of problems around that, subsurface issues. The governments are basically saying, well, you can't go skin deep, it's everything above the ground. But what about the minerals, the oils, and everything else that are in there? All of the resources are, and so the reconciliation has got a long way to go. We're just getting started on that. And people have got to recognize that, why don't the Indians get their act together? Well, hang on here. There's been a couple of centuries, if not many decades, under which Indigenous people have been suppressed. In my community, for example, in order to change a light bulb, INAC of the day basically said, well, hang on here. We're going to send out an electrician to change that light bulb, because we weren't allowed to do it ourselves, to change that light bulb. Now, imagine the expense. Where my community is on an island. So they not only had to send somebody from Vancouver, to get up to Prince Rupert and to fly out to Gitxaala to change a bloody light bulb. And so we've got a long way to go in terms of this reconciliation piece, but we definitely are open to industry, negotiating in very openness with Indigenous communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Clifford. And you did a fantastic job of answering the other question in the chat box that I hadn't asked, which is Indigenous Affairs or INAC or Diane helpful? So thanks for answering that in your response there. Thank you so much to our honored panel and just our speakers. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your experiences and your insights. This has just been wonderful. I have taken so many notes with fantastic quotes. You're just really great job. So thank you, and thank you, Dale, for hosting us all.
Thank you, Anne. A wonderful job of directing what, in my opinion, is a long overdue conversation in Canadian society, not just in the business community, but in the wider Canadian public. Thank you, Alicia. Thank you, Chief Clifford. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Chief Crystal. I do appreciate your time this morning. It was a fascinating discussion, and I think we need to have lots more of it within our circles and with our outside people as well. Again, thanks. Stay safe and keep well.
Thank you.
Thank you.